Let's look at one method of setting up a problem, and I'm going to start my first sketch on the top plane. So I'll right click or click on the top plane and I'll do new sketch, and then I'm going to insert an image. Now I've already put the sketch picture tool on my ribbon. You may need to go in and find that, so I'm going to tell it to do sketch picture, and this step isn't really needed, but it will help visualize what we're doing here. And so I have this image, and we see that it is 4 inches from here to here, and so that means from here over to here would be 8 inches. I'm going to drag this up to about that intersection location of the tangent point, and then I'll drag this over to about there, and I'm going to then set that distance as 8 inches, and that will scale my image. Alright, and then I want to put the origin at a convenient location, datum, and I see all the dimensions are going from the center line, and they are all on the inside of this curve, so I'm going to put the origin right there. So I'm going to move this down, and I'll do it in a couple steps here. I'll have to zoom in on that, and I'm going to then move that origin right there. Now the picture is just for reference, don't take it too seriously. I could tell it to remove the background of the picture. I'm not sure how well that will look. Let's try to set a transparency, and I'll pick up this area, so that kind of removes most of that background. You don't really have to do that. You may not want to do that because it may make it more difficult to tell the imported image from the sketch. But I'll go ahead and say OK to that. And so then I'm going to start a new sketch. Now I never sketch on the same sketch where I place my image. So I'll start a new sketch, and then I will draw a line horizontally about like this. And actually there's a easier way of doing this, so rather than do it that way, I'm going to do a midpoint line, and I'll do it from the origin over to about here, and then I'm going to dimension that distance from here over to here as the 2.25, and so I'll dimension that from the origin over to here, and I'll put in that 2.25. Alright, so I have my first line drawn of my sketch, and then I have a center line coming up here, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's do a center line, and I'll do that from the origin. I'll do that up to about here, and we can go ahead and dimension that line as 5 inches. So let's dimension that, and I'll put in that 5 inches. Alright, then I'm going to put the horizontal line up here. Now notice that I didn't get my image scaled exactly, so only use it for reference. And I'll draw a horizontal line, and then I'm going to select the midpoint of this line, and I'll hold down the control key. I'll select the end of this line, and I can then put a coincident constraint or relation between those 2 points, and it moves it down to that location. I'll then do and again we could have used that center point line command. That might have been a step easier. I'll draw or dimension from here to here, and that distance is the 4 inches. And so now we see that is scaled. Now I need to draw some arcs and some lines in here. I'm going to go into the line command, but I'm going to click on the end of this line, and I'll move back, and it changes to an arc. And so I'm going to put that arc into about here. I'll move away, I'll go back, it changes into an arc. I'll come down to about here, and then I'll draw a line to there. I'll move away, I'll come back, don't click on it, it changes to the arc command. I'll come down here, I'll click here, I'll move away, come back, it changes to an arc. I'll come to about here, and then I'll draw my line up to here, move away, come back, it changes to an arc, and I'll close this arc up right there. Okay, now we need to put some dimensions in here, and I see that it's 132 degrees across this arc. So let's zoom in on that. And now it might be that I've got this in here, it might be best to hide the visibility of that first sketch so it doesn't interfere, or the image, so it doesn't interfere with what I'm doing. And so I'm going to put a couple construction lines in here, and so I'll do a construction line from here to the center of this arc and to the other end of the arc, and then I'll dimension from this line to this line, and that is 132 degrees. And then I want to make sure I have tangents between all of these pieces of geometry, and so I see that I have a tangent here and I have a tangent there, but I don't have a tangent here. So I'm going to, crossing windows, select those two, and we'll add this tangent relation at that location. And then I have a tangent here, I have a tangent here, one here, one here, one here, but I'm missing a tangent here. So I'll control select those two entities, and I'll do tangent on those two. Alright, then I'll continue to put my dimensions on here. So I have a dimension from the center line over to the center of this arc, and that dimension is given on the drawing as 5.5. And then I have a dimension for the diameter of this arc is 1.5. So I'm going to dimension that as a radius, but let's assume that I can't do that division in my head. So I'm going to say equal to 1.5 divided by 2. I'll say OK to that, and so I have that radius in here. The distance from this line down to the center of this arc is given on our drawing as 5.15, and then the length of this line, and I accidentally got that point, so I'll do that again. So the aligned length of this line is 1.5. The radius of this arc, we're given a diameter, so I'll do equal to, assume I can't do that math in my head. The diameter is 2.5 divided by 2 for the radius. Or we could come over here and we could change that to a diameter, but I'd prefer to have that as a radius rather than the diameter. And then the distance from the origin over to the center of this arc is 5, and the distance from the center of this arc over to the origin is 6.5. And then we need to put an angle dimension in here, and I'm going to put in some construction lines to help with that. So I'm going to do a construction line, and I'll do it vertically up from this point. Now, I don't like to leave unconstrained geometry, so I'm going to select that point, and I'll hold the control key down. I'll select this line, and I'm going to make that point, I'll put a coincident relationship between this point and the end of this line. And then we'll put in the dimension between this line, and that is 20 degrees. Alright, I have put in a lot of the dimensions. Let's turn the visibility of sketch number 1 back on again. And so I have the 5 inches here, I have the 2.5, I have the radius 1.25, I have the 20, I have the 1.5, I have the 6.5, I have the 5 inches, I have half of the 1.5 here for the radius, I have the this dimension, and I'm doing, imagine you had a yellow highlighter and you're on a sheet of paper. Highlight each one of these dimensions as you create them. So I have this one, I have this one, so I have all the dimensions that we are given, but my geometry isn't fully defined. I'm going to drag this arc so that it's closer. Keep in mind that our image is off a little bit, so it's closer to what the image was. And I'm going to dimension the radius of this arc, and I'm going to try that at 0.475, and that appears to be, if I move the image down a little bit, that appears to be what that was intended to be. I could try 0.5 and see what that looks like. I think that was a little bit big. So there is a missing dimension that we have to guess to get our sketch fully constrained. And so if I hide sketch number 1, we see that it is now, everything's black, and down here it tells us that it's fully defined. And then I can mirror this stuff to the other side of the center line. So I'll do mirror entities, and I could have used this dynamic mirror, but that might have been a little bit too complex at the beginning stage. So I'll do mirror entities, and I'm going to mirror all of this geometry on this side of the center line. I don't need that line and this line, and I'll get the mirror about the center line, and I'll say OK to that. Alright, everything's black, it's all fully defined. Now on our original sketch, there's a thickness here of 0.3 towards the outside, and I took off the thickness, but I think it was 0.2 from top to bottom. And so let's I'll finish sketch, and I will hide my sketch 1, and actually let's just leave that the image on for a minute. Let's highlight sketch number 2, so it's highlighted. I'm going to do extrude, but I don't want to extrude that entire area. I want to just the thickness to the outside, so I'm going to tell it that's a thin feature. The thickness of the thin feature is 0.3. I'll tab that to preview it, so 0.3. Again, our image is off just a little bit. With the dimensions take precedence, so use the dimensions, and I think this was 0.2 if I remember correctly for the height of it. And I'll say OK to that. Now if at some point you wanted to rescale that image so that it's closer to the true model, of course you could go back into sketch 1, edit that, edit the image, and rescale it. Remember, when I put that scale factor in here, when I put that arrow from here to here, I was just doing it by eyeball.